Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, a repeating history of post-election violence in Kenya. Today we ask, what should be done to prevent another political and humanitarian disaster? Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for all your live feedback. Tweet her, use the hashtag AJStream. So Malika, today's conversation really building off a conversation we had on Twitter last week after Kenya's first presidential debate.
Yes, we used the hashtag Kenyans on Twitter, AJE, and we got lots of great responses. And it's a conversation that's continuing until this day. So we recently asked those Twitterati, if you will, whether social media will exacerbate or help ease ethnic tensions in Kenya. And we got this video response from one of the members of our chat.
Hi, I'm Nanjira from Nairobi, Kenya. On the question of social media and ethnic tensions, it could help or hurt depending on the kind of conversations that will carry the day. At the end of the day, social media is a means of communication, and it's all about the content and the content that carries the conversation. And it's my sincere hope that it will be a conversation that helps to further the democracy, and a conversation that will be about addressing the real issues that are, and not just criticizing or bringing each other down over ethnicity.
Now, for those of you at home, whether you're in Kenya or without, let us know. Join the conversation by using the hashtag AJStream.
And joining us in studio is Kurudi Kanyinga. He is a professor at the University of Nairobi's Institute for Development Studies. His academic research focuses on development and governance in Kenya. Kurudi, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Do you have an idea for a future show? Send your pitch to us in the form of a video. Just go to stream.aljazeera.com and click on that red button to record a 30-second message. It's a really easy way to have your voice heard in the stream.
My name is Ashwat Masoodi. I'm a journalism student in New York. I'm a Kashmiri, and I'm in the stream.
Can Kenya end its cycle of post-election violence? Since the revival of multi-party politics in 1992, election season has consistently been a time of high alert for Kenyans. In 2007, the disputed victory of President Mwai Kibaki caused widespread ethnic violence that killed nearly 1,300 people, and it forced 600,000 Kenyans from their homes. More than 5 years later, many of those victims remain refugees in their own country. The upcoming vote on March 4th is being viewed as a test of the country's new constitution, which aimed to fix long-standing issues, including land disputes and the marginalization of certain ethnic groups. Despite the constitutional reforms, critics say these root causes of violence and tribal tensions remain largely unresolved. So, as Kenyans prepare to vote, what should be done to avoid repeating the nation's history of election-related violence? To help us answer these questions, we're joined by Peter Olingo. He is the executive director of the Institute for Education in Democracy. That's an NGO that promotes civic participation in Kenya. He's also a member of the steering committee for Kenya's election observation group. He joins us via Skype from Nairobi. We're also happy to have a few prospective Kenyan voters joining us via Google Plus Hangout today. They've got some questions for our guests, so thanks to everyone for being here. Kurudi, I want to start with you. You know, there was so much violence and displacement after the 2007 election. Has Kenya even recovered from that?
Actually, when you look at it very carefully, we can see that Kenya has not properly healed from that post-election violence, because it was caused by quite a number of factors, including perceptions of marginalization from political power, perceptions of concentration of political power in ethnic groups or ethnic leaders who assume office, discrimination on basis of ethnicity, for instance. And there is also the youth bulge itself, and the question of the youth unemployment in the country. How much has Kenya done that? There was also the factor concerning impunity, people breaking the law and not being held accountable to it, accountable for the crimes that they commit, issues to do with corruption. So the question to ask is, how much have we done within the last 5 years? And one can say that, yes, we've been having a coalition government that has been making it extremely difficult to address some of these particular challenges, and therefore we are going to an election when some of these particular factors have not been properly addressed. And it's the hope of many Kenyans that the new constitution, if we elect good leaders to effectively implement it, will start at the beginning of the process to address some of the structural features of this particular crisis that we have had.
Peter, based on what the professor is saying, do you feel like there's a certain fragility to Kenya right now, and do you sense anxiety among voters?
Yes. A number of things, really. I think Professor is correct in many ways. Kenya is a nation that is at crossroads as we approach the elections now. And the biggest thing about it is that, yes, we have quite a number of structural defects in society called Kenya. And those needed to be fixed before we get into these elections. But unfortunately, many of them remain unfixed up to now. And that is a problem. And so they are becoming election issues, which shouldn't have been the case. So yes, we have to, as Kenyans, look at ourselves in the eyes and ask, look, are we going to make these elections any different from what we saw in 2007 and the skirmishes that we saw in early 2008? And that is the biggest questions that Kenyans are all asking. And as civil society, we are all grappling with this in terms of helping Kenyans to prepare well for the elections, in terms of their participation, in terms of their expectations, but we are also urging Kenyans to remain calm and preach peace so that we have an election that is peaceful and that the experience that we had in 2007, 2008 is something that will guide us and will remain with us and help us to have credible elections and peaceful elections this time round.
And Peter, those questions that you mentioned that Kenyans are asking themselves are the same questions our community members are asking themselves. Lovely Linda on Twitter says, ethnicity is a major factor rather than issue-based politics in Kenyan elections. Why? Divide and rule perfected. That's echoed on here on Twitter by Ro Luch, who says, violence is inevitable this time around because the tension is so high and politicians are polarizing communities more. But Muthoni Mayingi in our Hangout, you're an entrepreneur in Nairobi. I want to direct this next tweet to you. Aswa says, the difference this time is that we the people are determined not to be divided along ethnic lines by our leaders. Do you find that to be true?
Hi, I actually do find that to be true. There's a vast improvement in political consciousness, and there's also a lot of social media activity where people come in and they pretty much use it as almost a town square setup. So political consciousness has improved. People are trying to educate themselves on the process. There is a vast, vast difference in Kenya this time.
Peter, how is it possible that the top candidates in the election, the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and his running mate, they're currently charged with crimes against humanity at the ICC. They're going to be facing trial at The Hague. How is it even possible that they're running?
This is the biggest dilemma and what one can call the paradoxes of our time, you know. And look, there are a couple of things here that one needs to consider. One is the legal benchmarks that we have in Kenya, you know, and also the moral, ethical question that we have. You know, ICC process is real. This is an international process which is grounded on international law, really. So it is a legitimate process. And whether one has been taken to The Hague, you know, wrongly or so to speak, the bigger question is the question of accountability and impunity that ought to be addressed in Kenya. But we are also operating in context of a legal framework that, you know, although was much better as in terms of the Constitution, if you look at Chapter 6 on integrity and leadership, that did raise, you know, the bar in terms of, you know, who qualifies as a leader and what is the criteria to determine leadership. But we saw that this was mutilated and watered down by legislators, you know, through the Integrity and Leadership Act, so that the benchmark, the legal benchmark, as it were, in Kenya, is on the basis of a presumption of innocence, you know, so that although there are serious human rights, you know, issues that are coming out through the ICC process, the presumption is that, you know, these two gentlemen are presumed innocent.
I understand the presumption of innocence, but Karuti, I mean, there are a couple issues here. One, did the court choose not to take a stand, or did they not have the jurisdiction to prevent them from running? And two, let's say they run and they win, what does that do to the stability politically and economically of Kenya?
Let's first of all begin with the ruling by the courts. The courts said they did not have a jurisdiction, and yet the matter they are dealing with is quite a weighty matter. They said that the matter belongs to the Supreme Court of Kenya. But in making that particular statement, they also made statements that actually trying to imply that they were making a ruling where they were saying that these gentlemen are actually proven innocent until the whole matter is determined by the court. That in itself is a contradiction. The second thing is that the court has now opened itself to various arguments on whether actually we can depend on the court to further the interest and the values of Chapter 6 of the Constitution. Everyone expected our courts, whether junior courts or the senior courts, to begin applying themselves to the values and aspirations of the Kenyan people as articulated in Chapter 6 of the Constitution. We have new values and principles of governance that must be on basis of which all state officers, especially the judges of the High Court or even the magistrates, must apply those principles in trying to make judgments on any particular case. So in my view, I think the courts here went wrong. And even to say that people go to the Supreme Court on this particular matter, again, this is to say that the courts were actually trying to avoid making a decision on such an issue. So in the first place, we can say the courts have started failing Kenya because they have started failing to apply the right provisions of the Constitution. Now, the second thing is that if these people were to win the election and take leadership of the country, we are simply saying that we shall be opening the country to another crisis, a crisis of international isolation, a crisis of economic slowdown, a crisis of lack of morality, and a crisis of impunity, if one can say that, because people with crimes will also be saying, I'm innocent until I'm proven guilty. So we are going to hold the courts at ransom. We are all going to hold the Kenyan society at ransom as people start asking themselves, how do we make interpretation of these various contradictions that we see? So my view has been for all along that the courts should have come in very early and trying to point out that these people cannot run on basis of integrity and on basis of morality. And
just to be clear, we're talking about alleged crimes that were committed after the 2007 election by the Deputy Prime Minister Kenyatta and his running mate.
And let me also add that from 2008 to date, the government has not shown any commitment to prosecute crimes committed during that particular period. There are 2 or 3 people who have been charged, and yet people know that there are crimes such as rape, crimes such as murder, crimes such as arson, and neighbors see neighbors who committed different crimes. So people see who committed what crime, people know who killed who, people know who burnt whose houses, and this has not really
it's specifically that issue that's being debated online that you're mentioning.
Yeah.
On Twitter here, Machiavelli says, anyone being investigated shouldn't run for public office, let alone the presidency. Kenyatta should definitely be disqualified. And then he's answered by Samuel, who says he is only disqualified upon conviction, not investigation. The trial, else we would be tossing key criminal law pegs aside. Now, Brian Koyo, in our Hangout, I know you have thoughts on this. You're a blogger speaking to us from Nairobi. Go ahead.
I think there's a double standard applied here. The fact that Uhuru Kenyatta, the Deputy Prime Minister, actually resigned from his post as Finance Minister based on integrity issues, seeing as he could not carry out his functions as Finance Minister based on the fact that he was a suspect, and to this day he's simply a suspect. He hasn't been found guilty of any crimes, and the manner in which the international community has reacted to the ICC charges has polarized the country in a way, because a lot of people are taking the stance that it is a way the international community is imposing their thoughts and their people on the Kenyan people. So what the Kenyan public sees is a version of neocolonialism. So this might help to harden the stance of some voters, and in the end might push a win for Uhuru and Ruto.
Well, there's a real harsh reality here, though, that Kenyans have to deal with, and that is countries like Britain and other EU countries have policies in place that they don't deal with ICC indictees, not people who are convicted, but indictees. Peter, I want to shift gears here a little bit. Land rights are frequently a source of conflict in Kenya that often end in violence. And after the post-election violence in 2007, hundreds of thousands of people were displaced. About 300,000 continue to be living in these essentially refugee camps, internal displacement camps. Why hasn't the national issue of landlessness really been addressed?
I think there is what one can describe as a lack of political will, and this is it. That the land question is a question which puts the powerful people in society against the weaker, people, and those are the landless people, the squatters, so to speak. And then you see the richer people, as it were. Kenya, if you know it, is owned by a few people, the super rich, and that divide is always there. So it's a question of lack of political will. And you see, in the context of the new constitution that we promulgated in 2010, the expectations of Kenyans were very high, because there is a whole chapter on the land question, on the land rights. And the expectations were that, as part of the historical issues and injustices that we had, that the Constitution was going to help us move ahead to resolve some of these. But you see a sense in which there is political reluctance to put in place the institutions, the mechanisms that could help implement that chapter of the Constitution so that these issues could be dealt with. And unfortunately, it's an issue that, although it has been there, in every election, almost since the return of multi-party democracy in '92, we had it in '97, and all it's been carried all through. And 2007, it was a huge issue as well. And we thought we were going to resolve it before these elections. And therefore, it is unfortunate that we are going into another elections, and the land question, the question of land rights, have not been completely resolved. For me, it is a constitutional issue. And this elections is about the implementation of the new constitution. And therefore, as Kenyans, I don't think there is any reason for us to bury our heads, in the sand and pretend that we don't have issues here. Yes, land issues, land rights are quite emotive. That is given, that's for a fact. But that should not make us shy away from debating this. In fact, for me, what I see is a sense in which this issue is not being debated, properly and maturely, as it ought to be,
Peter, you mentioned that this is an emotive issue, and you're exactly right. Lawrence on Twitter says, land is systematically mismanaged since independence in favor of a few close to the seat of power, including by the current government. Now, Brian, it's funny that Peter said that, because that's exactly what you told our producers ahead of the show, that people are burying their heads in the sand over this.
Exactly. We keep talking about an emotive issue, and it is in Kenya. People go to great lengths to keep their land in the family. It's a big deal in the country. But a few weeks ago, the Inspector General of the Police and a few quarters from the government wanted the whole issue of land not discussed in a public sense, because it would cause people to go back to that sense where there'd be chaos in the country. Like, it would cause conflict. And it's about time. This is 50 years after independence, and we're still talking about the same things that we were talking about in 1963. The fact that we've buried our heads in the sand all this time is exactly the reason why we are at this place in our history. People in power own large tracts of land, and this is a known, this is a given. It's not like people don't know about these things, but the government or those in power want us to remain quiet about it, using conflict as a red herring. And it's about time we got wiser about that.
So, Kurudi, what he's talking about is the Inspector General of Police issued this order. It's essentially a gag order that says if you talk about these land rights issues as part of your political campaign, you're going to be charged with hate speech and thrown in jail.
Yeah.
What's the political motivation for arresting people and charging them with hate speech when they want to talk about one of the core issues in Kenya?
This really took everyone by surprise, because the Inspector General of Police was telling people don't discuss land. And yet we know throughout Kenya's history, land has been part and parcel of Kenya's politics. There is no single general election that has never had land as a question. The decolonization struggle, the fight for independence in the country, was the fight over land. And the elections that followed thereafter have been informed and shaped by land issues. But the problem why the land question has not been resolved is simply because the people supposed to resolve the land question are the people who are responsible for the problem in the first place, as Peter Lingwa said. But let me also come out clearly here and say that the whole country does not have one single land question. We do not have a single land question, and therefore we do not have a single land solution. At the coast, what we have...
Does it vary tribally?
It varies from place to place depending on the histories of how that land problem was created. There are instances where land meant for the poor was taken over by the rich. Rift Valley is a very good example. There are histories where land settlement schemes for the poor and the landless was taken over by people from a different ethnic community. That's a different question. At the coast, we have got people who got their land during the Arab Sultan of Zanzibar before colonialism began. These are the absentee landlords who live in Muscat and who live in Saudi Arabia. They have no basis really in East Africa. This is what is creating quotas at the coast of Kenya.
You're taking it way back. So I want to look towards the future. I want us to listen to a video comment about the youth.
To ensure post-election peace and security following the March elections in Kenya, I think the Kenyan youth should be given a lot of attention, because they are the most susceptible to go back to violence since they are still very young in the new constitution. The candidates should refrain from call on partisanship and ethnic partisanship. It just doesn't get anywhere.
So Francois mentions the youth. We're going to go to Dorothy in our post show to talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, so that's just going to be in a couple of minutes. But before then, Malika does have a few other stories that we're following.
If you were watching one of thousands of videos capturing the Russian meteor strike last week, you might not have noticed the background music. German copyright advocates cried foul when they heard a song by British singer Leona Lewis. It was playing on the radio at the time this video was shot. Well, Germans who tried to view the clip of this century's largest meteor strike could only see this. The block is part of a long-running dispute between Google, which owns YouTube, and Germany's music royalties collection agency. According to one study, more than 60% of the top 1,000 most popular YouTube videos are blocked in Germany because of copyright disputes. Our next lead's out of Malawi, where students have joined their picketing teachers to demand an end to a nationwide strike. Ben Chiza told me on Twitter it never rains for Malawi's under fire president, Joyce Benda, as primary school kids call for her to resign. 170,000 government workers demanding a pay increase have been on strike since last week. Students want people to know that the strike impacts them as well. Journalist Mabuto Banda tweets, police tear gas pupils from 4 primary schools. The pupils want their striking teachers back in class. This story was sent to us by Chikando on Facebook. We ask for stories each day, so leave your pitch in the comments thread. And among the issues we're spotlighting this week are the obstacles facing Afghanistan. As part of Al Jazeera's special series on Afghan refugees, we're asking, what challenges do Afghans still need to overcome? Tweet your answers to @AJEnglish. Use the hashtag AfghanChallenge. Lisa?
All right, the post show is next. It's streamed at aljazeera.com. But on Monday, have our personal computers become spy tools threatening our privacy? We speak to Cory Doctorow, a self-proclaimed cyber optimist, about the war on computer freedom and his dreams of a techno-utopia. So send us your thoughts and your questions on that. And until then, we'll see you online. Welcome to the Stream's online post show. We're looking ahead to Kenya's March 4th election. In addition to discussing some of the concerns people have of possible post-election violence, I want to get back to our conversation. We ended on a video comment from one of our viewers saying that you really have to focus on the youth. They are the most susceptible to displacement and, of course, to violence. Crudy, I wonder if you would comment on that.
Yeah, I think our politicians really pay attention to what needs to be done to improve the skills of the youth so that they can have gainful employment. No one pays attention to what kind of projects and programs need to be established for the youth instead of so that the youth can be gainfully occupied rather than standing and being idly occupied. And when they are idle and when they are unemployed, politicians always pick them up and mobilize them for different purposes. But we have not seen any single politician coming with a program to say that this is the direction we are going to take for the next 10 years to ensure that our growing youth will be gainfully employed, our growing youth will be having skills to participate in modern economy.
So you're saying no politician has executed any sort of vision for the youth?
No one is having a vision for the youth other than mobilizing them for different purposes.
And people on Twitter are agreeing. Dickens says, politicians are running issue-based campaigns, but they hope for tribal-based voting. And Real Kenyan says, in Kenya, tribalism, I'm shocked at the sides my very learned friends are taking. Civic education can't help nobody here, he says. Well, Dorothy Oko, I wonder if that's true. You're a communications manager for East and Francophone Africa at Google. What are the initiatives that Google is taking to combat some of this?
One of the things we've done, a campaign that we organized with the United Nations, is the Sports for Peace campaign. In Swahili, Shabikia Kura Amani na Kura Yako, which means choose peace by voting correctly. And we have seen what we have done is use the sports celebrities, rugby players, footballers, runners, athletes, and ask them to pass peace messages through Google Hangouts, which are then live streamed on YouTube. And we have found that many young people have been looking at these videos, and I think the message does resonate with the young people, because the players say, if we do not have peace, we cannot play. If we cannot play, you cannot be watching us, and therefore, please be careful and vote correctly, and let's vote for peace. So we are seeing that engagement with young people.
Noni, I'm curious what you think in terms of not just the role of young people, but the role of social media. Do you see it as a unifying tool or potentially something that could escalate these divisions and tensions? You need to unmute yourself, Noni.
Sorry.
There you go.
I think social media is more of a unifying tool from what we've seen. We've had a lot of positive campaigns such as the Kilimani Festival, I Run This City, and Kenyans Against MPs bonuses. We're yet to see something that is ethnically driven, for example, Kikuyus for Uhuru. So I think that social media thus far has proven to be more unifying than divisive in Kenya.
How important a role do you think social media is going to play in this upcoming election? Any at all?
I think social media is playing a very important role in terms of unifying people towards issue-based campaigns. And the second thing is that we are not seeing social media involved increasingly in negative campaigns as has been the case in the past. In 2008, social media played a major role in playing out negative ethnicity. But this time the government has cracked down on negative ethnicity on social media, and therefore social media instead is moving out into mobilizing.
So individual campaigns in 2007 were driving this negativity?
Negative ethnicity. But this time I think we are seeing social media being used for something that is positive, if one can say that.
Well, Peter, actually, I want your thoughts on this same topic of social media. Retired thinker on Twitter says the impact of social media is limited. Majority of Kenyans do not even use social media. And that resonates with a blogger here, AfricanPlay-Doh.com. Has a piece on the recent televised presidential debate, which we covered using KOTAJE, and he mentions the fact that the debate wasn't in Kiswahili, it was in English, therefore leaving out a huge segment of society. So I'm wondering, are we overlooking a great portion of the population by focusing on social media and English?
I think this is a question that we have to tie up with the segment of society that is most vulnerable, and this is the youth. And for a fact is that the youth bulge that we have in the country is a question that we need to also deal with very well. As Professor said, we need to deal with questions of unemployment, etc., etc. But the most important thing is that there are many Kenyans, running into millions, who are holding, have access to mobile telephone handsets, and this is a facility that enables them to use social media, and it's becoming quite a powerful tool, especially amongst the younger people, and this is something that cannot be wished away. I think in the context of the campaign, yes, it's something that has a potential to generate negative things insofar as stability of the country is concerned, and also insofar as peace and violence around these coming elections are concerned. But yes, we have seen a sense in which the government has come out through the commission, the Communication Commission of Kenya, and also the National Commission on Cohesion and Integration, which has also come out very strongly to just try to monitor the extent to which negative messages are going through social media.
Kurudi, I'm going to pause you there, Peter. We've only got about a minute left in the show, and Kurudi, I want to give you the last word. Give us your sense of what's ahead in terms of what changes ahead and how things are going to play out on March 4th.
I think many Kenyans are putting a lot of pressure from below to have a new Kenya and to break with the past. What is likely to happen is after the elections, Kenyans will be putting a lot of pressure on their politicians and leaders generally to have a new Kenya, to have a Kenya that breaks with the past, and a Kenya that actually is governed by the rule of law, and a Kenya that respects the principles of accountability. Unless we underline the rule of law and accountability as the building pillars of a new Kenya, then we are not likely to see progress that people have been desiring for.
Well said. Professor Kurudi Kanyinga, Peter Olingo, and everyone in our Google Hangout, thanks for joining us. Now on Monday, have our personal computers become spy tools, threatening our very own privacy? We speak to Cory Doctorow, a self-proclaimed cyber optimist, about the war on computer freedom and his dreams of a techno-utopia. Until then, we'll see you online.